All right, we're ready. Okay, good evening and welcome to the second of our Tutu lecture series this 2023. We are pleased tonight to have with us Reverend Shaun Cozett from St. Paul's, Bree Street in Cape Town. He is the Diocesan Environment Coordinator, he's an alumnus of the college, and he's a member of our college council. And he's going to be speaking to the topic, can Desmond Tutu's Ubuntu theology assist us in caring for creation? So we give you a warm college welcome, Shaun.
Thank you, Dr. May. It is my great joy and privilege to be able to offer this evening's lecture as part of this year's lecture series, considering several contemporary questions the Church has to address in our time and trying to do so faithfully by the light of the theology of our former Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I'm honored to have been asked by the Reverend Canon Janet Trisk to offer my thoughts on Tutu's theology and caring for creation, and humbled that Dr. Percy Chinganga has reiterated the invitation after his installation as rector of the college. I'm grateful for this electronic means by which we are able to gather, even in different locations across the country, and especially for the opportunity to speak at the start of a new college term to those gathered in the common room, now dedicated to the memory of the man known affectionately as the Arch. I'm not sure whether it was intentional, but this evening's lecture is offered on Mandela Day, the day on which everyone in the world is encouraged to offer up 67 minutes of our time in honor of the 67 years of service offered by former President Mandela. Today also marks the 105th anniversary of his birth. One can hardly overstate the importance of Mandela and Tutu to the endeavors for freedom in our country and to the formation of a democratic South Africa. We will for years reflect both on the impact they had on this nation and the special bond that they shared. Nor can we or should we ever forget how different they were in character, yet united in purpose. As Mark Visser wrote in the Mail and Guardian on the eve of the first Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings, if the grave plodding Nelson Mandela is our reliable father, then that hyperactive figure in the purple cassock at his side is our naughty uncle, the one who carries all the family's emotional baggage, weeping for us when we grieve, and dancing with joy when we celebrate. So let us pray. Disturb us, O Lord, when we are too well pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have become true because we dream too little, because we sail too close to the shore. Disturb us, O Lord, when with the abundance of things we possess, we have lost our thirst for the water of life, when having fallen in love with time, we have ceased to dream of eternity, and in our efforts to build a new earth, we have allowed our vision of heaven to grow dim. Stir us, O Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture into wider seas, where storms show thy mastery, where losing sight of land, we shall find the stars. In the name of him who pushed back the horizons of our hope and invited the brave to follow him. Amen. Can Tutu's Ubuntu theology aid us in our care for creation? This is the subject of this evening's lecture. In offering an answer to this question, I will start by discussing some of the events in the life of Tutu that helped shape his thinking. I will do a short timeline of a long and illustrious career and a life lived over 90 years. I will then look at what we mean by Tutu's Ubuntu theology and offer an overview of a developing body of knowledge in the form of the humanities, or in the field of the humanities, called environmental humanities. This multidisciplinary field brings together researchers and practitioners from different humanities disciplines to offer ways of thinking and speaking about environmental crises. One voice that needs to be intentionally added to the plethora of voices is that of Christian theology. And I will argue that Tutu's Ubuntu theology gives us a good springboard from which to incorporate theology into environmental humanities. Bishop N.T. Wright, writing about Eucharistic theology and the new creation, says, God's work in the world is never merely pragmatic. It isn't simply, we can organize a program to go do this. If you think we can do God's work like that, read the lives of people like William Wilberforce and think again. You can't. You need prayer. You need the sacraments. You need that patient faithfulness, because we are not wrestling against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and the world rulers of this present darkness. Read biographies of great Christians. Read about Desmond Tutu. Who would have thought 40 years ago that at the start of the 21st century, there would be a black Archbishop in Cape Town chairing a commission for truth and reconciliation, listening to white thugs and black thugs confess their sins? Who would have thought that? Of course, God had other ideas, because that black Archbishop used to spend 3 or 4 hours on his knees every morning, day after day, week after week, and get others to do the same. He was living the sacramental life of the church and claiming the victory of Jesus over the principalities and powers, end quote. As students of biblical interpretation, one of the first things we learn is to read the Bible in its own context. We are taught to consider the history and geography of the time and to reflect on the nature and the makeup of biblical societies. And we are invited to join the search for the historic Jesus. Failing to interpret scripture in its own context would lead to the undesired outcome of anachronism, placing ideas, principles, and materials outside the historic context in which they are likely to have been relevant. The challenge with interpreting a character like Desmond Tutu is that he lived in our time. The risk we run with applying Tutu's theology to contemporary social questions is that we could easily assume that Tutu's context throughout his life was the same as ours is today, and thus draw conclusions of our own and make judgments based on where we stand, as opposed to the historical context in which his statements were made and his actions occurred. Allow me to trace some of the experiences and encounters that were central to the development of Tutu's theology. Desmond Mpilo Tutu was born in Klerksdorp on 7 October 1931 to a Motswana mother and a Xhosa father. Tutu was sickly from birth and suffered from polio that atrophied his right hand. He attended a Methodist primary school before transferring to the Swedish boarding school in the St. Agnes Mission. Several months later, he moved with his father to Ermelo in Eastern Transvaal. Tutu attended the Johannesburg Bantu High School, where he excelled academically and was part of the school rugby team. At the age of 16, he contracted tuberculosis, and while in hospital for 18 months, received frequent visits from Trevor Huddleston, a priest in Sophia Town, and a great influence on both Tutu's politics and his ministry. Tutu would later say of that time in hospital, I don't think I've ever felt that same kind of peace, the kind of serenity I felt after acknowledging that maybe I was going to die of this TB. Notwithstanding the amount of time he spent out of school due to ill health, Tutu secured admission to study medicine at the University of Witwatersrand, but sadly his parents could not afford the tuition fees. Instead, he studied teaching, gaining a government scholarship. He studied at Pretoria Bantu Normal College. There he served as treasurer of the Student Representative Council, helped organize the Literacy and Dramatic Society, and chaired the Cultural and Debating Society. During one of these debating events, he met the young lawyer, Nelson Mandela. The next time they would meet would be after Mandela's release from prison in 1990. Tutu married Nomalisa Leah in 1955, first at the Krugersdorp Native Commissioner's Court, before having a Roman Catholic ceremony, since Mama Leah was raised in the Roman Catholic Church. The couple with a young family would go on to find a spiritual home at St. Paul's Church, where Tutu served as a Sunday school teacher, assistant choir master, parish councillor, lay preacher, and a subdeacon. Tutu left teaching after the introduction of the inferior Bantu education, and in 1961 was ordained to the priesthood after studying at St. Peter's College in Rosettenville. His time at seminary coincided with intensified aggression of the apartheid state, including the Sharpeville massacre in 1960. He served his title at
The
St.
sound even
Paul's.
be.
Is the sound too low?
Okay.
What's going on? The sound is fun. Come on, man. Messing around with this thing, it's ridiculous.
Let me start that paragraph again. Tutu left teaching after the introduction of the inferior Bantu education, and in 1961 was ordained to the priesthood after studying at St. Peter's College in Rosettenville. His time at seminary coincided with intensified aggression of the apartheid state, including the Sharpeville massacre in 1960. He served his title at St. Albans in Benoni, where Tutu received 2/3 the stipend of his white colleagues. In 1962, Tutu was sent to King's College in London to train as a theology teacher. Tutu would go on to note that the freedom he felt in London, away from the apartheid state with its oppressive laws and the need to carry a pass. He returned to South Africa in 1966 to teach at St. Peter's College at Fedsem in Alice, having completed a master's in theology with a thesis focusing on Islam in West Africa. En route from King's College, Tutu also studied in East Jerusalem for 2 months, reading Arabic and Greek to complement the Hebrew he learned while in London. Tutu, the first black staff member of the college, taught doctrine, Old Testament, and Greek. During this time, Tutu began publishing in academic journals and also served as the chaplain to Fort Hare University. It was here that Tutu met and engaged many young student leaders, including Bani Pitiana and Steve Biko. As David Kenman writes on his blog, Tutu's house became a home for Pitiana and other students. Bani Pitiana describes his student group as radical, angry, impatient, and militant. They objected to the way in which the National Union of South African Students was white-dominated, and under the leadership of Steve Biko, broke away to form the South African Students Organization. This was the beginning of the Black Consciousness movement. There was an occupation at Fort Hare University, and the authorities called the police, who arrived in armored cars, carrying guns and with police dogs. Desmond Tutu, wearing his cassock, joined the students and told the police to arrest him as well. He then began to lead the students in prayer, followed by Nkosi Sikeleli Africa and other freedom songs. The police were nonplussed, paralyzed into inaction. This was the moment when Tutu gained his personal conviction that galvanized him into the politics of activism. It was a decisive moment in the development of his ecumenical journey. End quote. In 1970, Tutu would begin teaching at the University of Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland, based in Lesotho. In 1975, he became the Anglican Church's first Black Dean of Johannesburg. It was during this time as Dean that he wrote an open letter to B.J. Foster entitled "A Growing Nightmarish Fear," in which he appealed to Foster to end apartheid and to deal with the growing threat of right-wing Afrikaners, fearing that the disaster was looming. Tutu wrote this letter, which would be ignored by Foster, weeks before the June 1976 Soweto uprising. After merely 7 months as Dean of Johannesburg, Tutu was elected as Bishop of Lesotho, and in 1978 became General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches. It was here that he achieved global prominence as a leading voice in the opposition to the apartheid regime. My one personal encounter with Archbishop Tutu involved a reflection on this time in his life. In November 2011, following the 7th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Durban, I was staying with the rector of St. John the Baptist in Pinetown in the Diocese of Natal, and he was tasked with driving Tutu from his hotel to the airport. I was invited to join him for the short trip, an invitation that I could not refuse. While in the car, we reflected on the interfaith service held the day before and how disappointed we all were with the low turnout. Archbishop Tutu then recounted the story in the hope that it would encourage us for future events. He told us that while he served as General Secretary of the SACC, he and a number of Christian leaders were invited to meet with the then President of South Africa and was asked to lead the morning devotion. While preparing for the meeting, he was troubled because he couldn't find an appropriate theme for that morning's devotion. While sitting quietly in the garden, he noticed the large crucifix in the middle of the garden and saw the nails in the hands of Jesus. He also noticed that it was winter and that the grass was brown. It dawned on him that spring was coming and that in a few weeks, the grass would be green and lush and the markings of winter would be gone. In the same way, he realized God would also bring about a transformation in our society. This was close to the feast of the Transfiguration, and he felt deep in his spirit that God was saying to him that just as Jesus was transfigured on the mountain and the grass would be transformed at the changing of the season, so God was able to transform South African society. Tutu expands on this experience in his book, God Has a Dream, as he writes, I sat quietly in the garden. As I sat quietly in the garden, I realized the power of transfiguration, of God's transformation in our world. The principle of transfiguration is at work when something so unlikely as the brown grass that covers our veld in winter becomes bright green again. Or when the tree with gnarled up leafless branches bursts forth with the sap flowing so that the birds sit chirping in the leafy branches. Or when the once dry streams gurgle with the swift flowing water, when winter gives way to spring and nature seems to experience its own resurrection. The principle of transfiguration says nothing, no one, and no situation is untransfigurable. That the whole of creation, nature, waits expectantly for its transfiguration, when it will be released from its bondage and share in the glorious liberty of the children of God, when it will not be just dry, inert matter, but will be translucent with divine glory. Christian history is filled with examples of transfiguration, and erstwhile persecutor like St. Paul could become the greatest missionary of the church he once persecuted. One who denied his master not once but 3 times, like St. Peter, could become the prince of the apostles, proclaiming boldly faith in Jesus Christ, when only a short while before he was cowering in abject fear behind locked doors. End quote. Mark Visser wrote in the article previously quoted, Tutu has minted our political discourse. It is he who appropriated the term rainbow from Jesse Jackson and imported it into our new South African vernacular. It is he, in fact, who coined the term New South Africa years before F.W. de Klerk started chucking it around. And it was he who first started speaking about reconciliation. In 1984, Tutu was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In his acceptance speech, speaking extensively on apartheid South Africa, Tutu concluded with words of hope that a new South Africa is possible. He said, and I quote, God calls us to be fellow workers with him so that we can extend his kingdom of shalom, of justice, of goodness, of compassion, of caring, of sharing, of laughter, joy, and reconciliation, so that the kingdoms of this world will become the kingdom of our God and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. End quote. A year later, Tutu was elected by the Synod of Bishops to serve as the first Black Bishop of Johannesburg, the same year as the state of emergency in South Africa. In his inaugural sermon, Tutu called on the world to impose sanctions on South Africa unless the government dismantled apartheid within 18 months. In the same sermon, he also assured white parishioners that he was not in fact an ogre and would be the bishop of everyone in the diocese. In 1986, Tutu was elected as the first Black Anglican Archbishop of Cape Town. When the Tutu family took up residency at Bishop's Court, the official residence of the Archbishop of Cape Town, it was still illegal for them to do so under the Group Areas Act, which had designated Bishop's Court as a whites-only area. In Bonteheuwel, where I served my curacy, Tutu is remembered as the Archbishop who was present when a young community leader and anti-apartheid activist, Ashley Creel, was murdered, and for his calling for peace and standing between the police and funeral goers at a funeral service filled with tension between the police and the community. During his time as Archbishop, Tutu continued the call for sanctions against South Africa, while at the same time entrenching his ministry in prayer. Again, from my personal experience, I know that Tutu celebrated the Eucharist every Friday morning at St. George's Cathedral from the time of his archiepiscopacy until well into his retirement through the ministry of his 2 successors, Njongonkulu Ndungane and Thabo Makgoba. St. George's Cathedral became both the place of protest and prominence of the Archbishop, and also the place where he stood at the altar of the Lord, leading God's people in prayer. Tutu was able to see Christ in the lifting up of the bread and wine as it became the body and blood of our Lord, and also to see the same Christ in the face of the oppressed. As Archbishop, he personified the words, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality." End quote. In 1990, Nelson Mandela spent his first night of freedom at Bishop's Court. After 20 years in prison, he spent that night at the official residence of the Archbishop, a place that was once designated for whites only. In 1996, following his retirement as Archbishop of Cape Town, Desmond Tutu became the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a contentious alternative to justice and retribution for the atrocities committed during apartheid. As Marco Visser again writes, here he was, Nobel laureate of the underdogs, accused of being a sellout for presiding over a process that will grant perpetrators amnesty rather than meting tough justice out to them. And his accusers were the very people he put his life on the line for. Usually Tutu, a little man, uses his animated hands to make him seem bigger, wrapped tight in a black jacket, the purple cassock just peeping through. He seemed here, however, to shrivel into diminution. Painful as the TRC clearly was for Archbishop Tutu, it was here that his Ubuntu theology was most evident, most tested, and most contested. Michael Battle in his doctoral research writes, whites were never his enemy, only the system of apartheid. Despite the systematic atrocities that whites leveled against Tutu's black heritage, he always sought reconciliation. Tutu's hope was to reunite the people of South Africa, and he wanted the church to initiate that goal. Just as Martin Luther King Jr. expressed grave dissatisfaction at the silence of the white American church during his career, so too Tutu decried the complicity of the white South African church in the matter of apartheid. Such complicity reflected heavily upon the church's theological convictions Tutu believed. It proclaimed God's indifference at, if not affirmation of, segregation and oppression. Tutu countered by claiming that the central work of Jesus was to effect reconciliation between God and us, and also between one human and another. In Tutu's own words, Ubuntu is very difficult to render into a Western language. It speaks of the very essence of being human. When we want to give high praise to someone, we say, hey, so-and-so has Ubuntu. Then you are generous, you are hospitable, you are friendly and caring and compassionate. You share what you have. It is to say, my humanity is caught up, is inextricably bound up in yours. We belong in a bundle of life. We say a person is a person through other persons. It is not, I think, therefore I am. It is rather, I am human, because I belong, I participate, I share. A person with Ubuntu is open and available to others, affirming of others, does not feel threatened that others are able and good, for he or she has a proper self-assurance that comes from knowing that he or she belongs to a greater whole and is diminished when others are humiliated or diminished, when others are tortured or oppressed or treated as if they were less than who they really are. Tutu's Ubuntu is built on the Imago Dei, that all people are created in the image and likeness of God, and emphasize the person as part of their surrounding environment, to quote Michael Battle. Tutu's Ubuntu theology is rooted in eschatology, since it speaks of hope while still living in the midst of despair. Tutu's Ubuntu theology brings together his African identity and his Christian faith, and opposes Christian views that sees the person as a single, unique entity. Tutu's Ubuntu theology says that a person must be defined within their context. This theology stands in contrast to the theology of dominion, so often derived from Genesis chapter 2, the emphasis of which has led many in the humanities to conclude that Christianity itself is at the root of the problem of ecology. Allow me to introduce the new discipline of environmental humanities. A growing discourse in response to the environmental crises facing the world is environmental humanities. This multidisciplinary body of work brings together researchers and practitioners from several fields within the humanities working together in response to environmental concerns. Where environmental science is concerned with processes and systems evident within nature, this burgeoning discourse aims to show that processes and systems are not in and of themselves objective and neutral. They derive meaning and purpose from who they are used by, and the meaning they hold for those who use them. This field of study builds on the work of human geographers who for decades have highlighted the role of people in the making and remaking of the earth. Our discussions on the Anthropocene, the current geological epoch in which human beings, through our culture of extraction and consumption, have become a force in species loss, migratory practices, and anthropogenic climate change, has been another springboard from which this new field of study has emerged and is growing. Key themes within this field include the rights of the earth, the relationship between people and the planet, growing urbanization, a critique of conservation practices, and sustainability. All this is described in processes of meaning making and illustrated in art and literature, and brings together theory and praxis. A key starting point in exploring environmental humanities is acknowledging the rift that exists between people and the environment. This field seeks to offer critical engagement with that rift, and also seeks creative and innovative ways of responding to that rift. In doing so, we inevitably see that the rift is also between people and ways in which we relate to each other across race, nationality, religion, and culture, even gender, to name but a few. One example of this rift is in the area of wildlife poaching. On the face of it, Poaching is the evil practice that seeks to massacre and exploit animals for human gain. Probably the most popular of these in South Africa is rhino poaching. We regularly hear about the numbers of rhinos that are being poached and the campaigns that have been established to offer a counter to this poaching. What we do not hear about in the popular media is how the description of the poacher serves the narrative of those who themselves continue to hunt rhinos. Often the difference between hunting and poaching is access to a permit. What we also do not discuss is the way in which protected areas are created, taking away communal land from communities and criminalizing subsistence practices that have kept livelihood sustainable for generations. The same could be said for abalone poaching, where we hear about the numbers of abalone being poached and the species being driven to extinction far more than we engage with the allocation of fishing quotas to communities whose livelihoods are dependent on the fisheries. Thus, to speak about species loss and extinction without also speaking about power and exclusion would be to tell only part of the story. The discipline of environmental humanities seeks to raise these and other questions about environmental crises through the tools of the humanities. Returning now to the subject of this lecture, can Tutu's theology help us in caring for creation? Perhaps I should ask, can Tutu's theology bring Christian theology into discussions with other humanities discourses seeking to work together in response to environmental crises? I believe that it can for the following reasons. Firstly, at the core of Tutu's Ubuntu theology is the remembering of the person and their surrounding environment, the bringing together of person and place. Ubuntu reminds us that we cannot be human on our own and that we need each other and our surroundings to be fully human. This core belief would sit well within environmental humanities, alongside other epistemologies that espouse the same belief. Secondly, Tutu's Ubuntu theology is not anthropocentric theology that focuses only on human-to-human relations. Tutu, after all, wrote the foreword to the Global Guide for Animal Protection, in which he said, and I quote, "I have spent my life fighting discrimination and injustice, whether the victims are blacks, women, or gays and lesbians. No human being should be the target of prejudice or the object of vilification or be denied his or her basic rights. But there are other issues of justice, not only for human beings, but also for the world's other sentient creatures. The matter of the abuse and cruelty we inflict on other animals has to fight for our attention in what sometimes seems an already overfull moral agenda. It is vital, however, that these instances of injustice not be overlooked." End quote. Thirdly, Christian theology has a rich history of environmental actions. Researchers such as Ernst Conradi at the University of the Western Cape and practitioners such as Bishop Jeff Davies, who served on the CPSA Synod of Bishops alongside Archbishop Tutu, have both for years held the importance of caring for creation before us. Their work has focused on helping the Church rethink both theory and practice with regard to the environment and how best the Church could respond. They have shown that Christians have an important role to play in caring for the earth, and that this work is rooted both in Scripture and Christian doctrine. Their work and the work of many others ecumenically has given rise to current initiatives in eco-theology globally, which is my fourth point. Initiatives such as the CPSA Environment Network, now the AXA Environment Network, Green Anglicans, the Roman Catholic Church's Laudato Si, eco-congregations, Arosha, Season of Creation, and many other similar initiatives exist that already highlight the need for a Christian response to environmental challenges. What Tutu's Ubuntu would add, especially to the latter two, is the awareness that we as Christians speak only to Christians. What stands out from the work of Desmond Tutu is that he is willing to speak to others who hold different views, but they could work together for a common cause. Tutu's Ubuntu theology should be the moral imperative for us to seek conversations with others who have differing worldviews and to learn and grow together. Tutu's Ubuntu theology should help us see that those who do not use our theological terminology to describe the world are also created in the image and likeness of God, and their efforts will be added to ours in our goal of a sustainable planet. Tutu's example of working across boundaries of race, gender, nationality, etc., should be an inspiration to us to work across disciplines and learn and develop our thoughts alongside others. Tutu's Ubuntu theology, I believe, can already be read alongside some of the foremost thinkers in environmental humanities. Tutu's Ubuntu theology should be read in response to Lynn White Jr.'s influential essay on the historical roots of our ecological crisis, in which he asserts that we shall continue to have worsening ecological crisis until we reject the Christian axiom that nature has no reason for existence except to serve human needs. Tutu's Ubuntu theology and its appreciation for meaning making can already be read alongside the work of Donna Haraway, who says, it matters what matters we use to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell to tell other stories with. It matters what knots knot knots, what thoughts think thoughts, what descriptions describe descriptions, what ties tie ties. It matters what stories make worlds and what worlds make stories. Tutu's reflection on Ubuntu extending to animals can already be read alongside the world of Anatsing and the multi-species ethnographies. Tutu's Ubuntu theology and the call for justice for all who are oppressed can already be read alongside the work of Rob Nixon, who alerts us to the realities of slow violence, the kind of violence that becomes overlooked because it has become systemic. Tutu's Ubuntu theology and the desire for dialogue can already be read alongside the work of Bruno Latour, who encourages us, be not the one who debunks, but the one who assembles, not the one who lifts the rug from under the feet of the naive believers, but the one who offers arenas in which to gather. Tutu's Ubuntu can already be read alongside the work of Rosalind Duffy, highlighting the plight of those called poachers in their own communities, doing what generations before them have done and are ridiculed, investigated, criminalized, and in some cases even killed for their actions. In conclusion, Tutu's Ubuntu theology was developed over many years and varying experiences. This theology served him well in various offices held in the church and beyond, and continues to inspire many to see the person within the context of their surrounding environment. This theology could form a critical component of the growing multidisciplinary work, exploring ways of communicating environmental messages and systems of meaning-making. Tutu's Ubuntu theology can already be used to bring the work of the church into the multidisciplinary field of study. On its own, it can be read alongside other theorists and can be a catalyst encouraging the church to add our voices and our action to those of other humanists seeking ways beyond science to say that the earth is in crisis. We helped create the crisis, but there is hope for the renewal of creation. A hope not only based on philosophy, but in getting your hands dirty, as we take our example from the man who, during a state of emergency at the height of apartheid, declared to P.W. Botha, "We have already won. You should join the winning side." And then he made the achievement of that hope his life's work. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaun. Thank you very much for your lecture tonight. People, I'm sure there's maybe some questions. If you have questions, now's the time to ask. Maybe if you can show me a hand or something and we'll call on you. Question? Oh. Hey, Rindani, I see your hand. You can go ahead.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you're unmuted.
Oh, thank you. Now, I just want to thank the college for what they're doing, which is to provide us with this lessons of Desmond Tutu, which is the mentor, who is our mentor at the moment in ministry. And then as today we celebrate Mandela Day, how can we as the church also play hands to celebrate the life of Desmond Tutu, so that even the world out there knows about the work that Tutu did through getting his hands dirty, just as the world today celebrate celebrate Nelson Mandela, that we too, we need to stand up and celebrate the icons that we have within the church. Thank you.
Thank you, Rindani. Thank you. Janet, I see your hand.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you very much to Shaun for a very challenging lecture. I'd like to ask a kind of speculative question. Shaun, you talked about Tutu's Ubuntu theology in relation mostly to animals when you talk about creation, but how would you think Tutu, and if you don't want to speculate, then how would you respond to Ubuntu with kind of the non-animal creation, so the oceans and the air and the stars and so on? How would you think that is part of our Ubuntu, our community?
Shall I answer now, or do you want to take a few questions?
Maybe go ahead and take that one, and if I see other hands, I'll take a note of who puts their hand up first.
Well, on the first one, on creating a Desmond Tutu, I think it's a brilliant idea. I think the Arch has left us so much that we can celebrate, that perhaps as the church, it's something we should own before we expect the world to own it. For us to have a day on which we celebrate the legacy of a great leader of the church and of society. on the issue of the environment, I must say I've not picked up anything from Tutu's theology, so I wouldn't want to put anything in the Archbishop's mouth. But my reading of his Ubuntu and speaking of people in their context, I think he would be quite accepting of us saying that Ubuntu extends to the water, Ubuntu extends to the river, precisely because he emphasizes that we have to place the person within their context, and therefore we would have to care for the context as well. So it's on that basis that I would say, yes, it should extend to not only animals and to other sentient beings, but also to life, well, but also to the earth itself and to earth systems.
Thank you, Shaun. Do we have any other hands with questions? Or if you pop it in the chat, I can look there as well. Shaun, I have a question about you were talking about the different narratives with rhino poaching and pearl poaching and narratives that are used to shape what we see and hear. I'm just wondering, in terms of popular things like rhino poaching, how can we as Christians respond to what's now a complex situation with these different narratives? What kind of response might we try to promote at a local level to such a thing as either pearl poaching or rhino poaching? And while we're thinking about that, I did see someone else's hand has gone up. Let me just see.
It's that priest there in the West Indies.
And Colo's hand has gone up as well, so we'll take his question as well. Go ahead, Dan Colo.
Oh, thank you very much. Good evening. It's afternoon here. I was going to I'm not sure if I would add something to Father Shaun, but I understand Tutu's Ubuntu's theology when it comes to nature is that as a Black man, this is what I was taught home, that you cannot be as complete without recognizing the nature and creation that will be part of your life. So Ubuntu will not only be focusing on people, it will be the entire creation, that also that the herbs that are out there in the fields, also they play a good role for us and for our health, and they also provide food and nutrition to us. So Ubuntu is also to take care and preserve the animals out there that will also be food to us on the other hand. And so it, of course, it is not complete only to focus to humankind when it comes to Ubuntu. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nokeche, and should I say good morning to you?
It's afternoon.
Noted, thank you. So on the question of poaching and narratives, I think what's important is that we have to say that the lives of the poachers also matter. there's a narrative that has been created around the poacher as evil, but we have to place that narrative in the context of the issuing of fishing rights and of permits. We have to place that narrative in the context of communal land being taken over for the creation of reserves and so on. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't speak of poaching and species loss, but I think it's important for us as the church to place it in a much broader context, to say that there are also reasons why we have left people often with no other option but to go to sea late at night to fish. We do also know that poaching is heavily connected to gangsterism, and that's a story that has to be told as well. But we have to also find ways of humanizing poachers who in many ways have been dehumanized through the way that we have described them and the way that we have described poaching practices. Does that answer your question? And maybe while you are unmuting, let me also add, we must also say that the Imago Dei extends also to the poacher, that even the person who comes to poach is created in the image and likeness of God. Because in many ways, the narratives that have been created have dehumanized poachers. And I think part of what the church could do is to help rehumanize people who've been dehumanized in that manner.
Thank you, Shaun. Are there any other questions that anyone wishes to put to Shaun while he's got the microphone? Hey, that was just God calling on the phone there behind me. Worry about it.
Thank you.
Okay, Shaun, I think yeah, I think we could actually talk about a lot here. You mentioned shalom as being an important part of the Archbishop's theology at one point, and I know in Indigenous theology they talk about the harmony principle being shared quite a lot around the world, and I wonder whether that is reflected in where the Archbishop's coming with the connection with shalom and the creation story and so on. So that might open up something else for us to go into. But I'd just like to thank you. You're live, Rendani.
Oh, sorry. I said my mic is off.
Yes, thank you. Shaun, I'm not expecting you to delve into that and to open it up for us tonight. But I would like to thank you for joining us and offering us your thoughts on Archbishop Desmond Tutu's Ubuntu theology and how it connects, especially with environmental humanities disciplines that I think we all now suddenly aware of. Oh, there's this whole other body of knowledge we want to find out about and connect with. So thank you very much for your time tonight, and we look forward to hearing from you again in the future.
Thank you. And thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, and I'll keep the meeting open for now while I'm tidying up this room. So if people want to stay and chat, they can. I'm going to stop the recording though at this point.